Hello and welcome to a video guide for Elemental Shamans. This is Noralex from Guild Immortal server gaming district. In this guide I will be covering three basic concepts for Elemental Shamans. 1. DPS rotation add-ons, 2. Spell combinations, and 3. DPS rotation in combat. This is the build for Elemental Shaman in WOTLK. You want 57 talents in your elemental tree. I will just scroll through it. One particular talent I like to take is Improved Fire Nova to reduce its cooldown and increase its damage. Some encounters you will need to do some more AoE damage and this talent will work nicely for you. The rest is pretty much standard stuff. In your enhancement tree you want 14 points. One particular talent I like to take is Shamanistic Focus to reduce the cost of shocks by 45%. And that is very nice mana economy. In terms of glyphs, you have your two important glyphs that you must have. One is Glyph of Lightning Bolt, which increases your main spell's damage by 4%. Your second important glyph is Glyph of Totem of Wrath, which increases your base spell damage. Your third glyph, however, is optional and it will depend which gear you use, on what glyph you pick as your third one. Now, endgame shamans using tier 10 usually have high haste. Because of that, Glyph of Flame Shock is probably one of the best glyphs you could be using because it scales very nicely with haste. In terms of gear, I'm using a full 264 gear set, so nothing too special. However, I am using one of the healer trinkets. In terms of your stats, you want your haste to be over 1000 and maybe more. I would aim for something like 1100, 1200. You can see I've got 905, however I am using Uzuri's Totem of Shattered Ice, which gives me extra 220 haste, which brings my total haste to 1109, which is roughly where you want it, maybe slightly higher. Your base crit, however, must be quite high. It's got to be definitely more than 40%. Ideal, you need to have it at 45, and if you can have it higher, that is not bad as well. However, 50% is quite unrealistic. I would aim for something like 45%. Your hit rating should be 10%. That is your on 10% from gear plus 1% from Draenei ratio, 3% from your own talents, and 3% additional from the raid given by Shadow Priest or a Balanced Druid. Your base spell damage, however, must be quite high as well. You've got to aim for 4000 self-buffed. In raid you want to have more. You can see here, once I place my totem using the glyph of the Totem of Wrath, my spell damage gets an additional burst, and bearing in mind that I'm also using Mardian Spyglass, that's extra 200 constant spell power, so my base spell power is 4000, which is where you want it to be. In terms of gems, you can see that majority of my gems are based on spell power because I've got correct amount of crit and haste and hit. After that, spell power becomes your main concern. You do want to meet the meta socket bonus, and the meta you should be using is the 21 critical strike rating and 3% increased critical damage, which is the chaotic Skyfire Diamond. You've got to make sure you meet the meta requirements, so you've got to put 2 blue gems somewhere. I've got one in my chest and another one in my gloves. Otherwise the rest of your gems should be based on spell power. If you are using a hybrid gem for the socket bonus, use haste and spell power gem, just like you can see there in the belt and in the pants. Otherwise goes pure spell power. Sometimes it is better to ignore the socket bonus to get more spell power out of your gear. Now first of all, I'll show you the add-on I use for my DPS rotation, and it's called Tell Me When. And you can see it's displayed there already, and I basically use the first line for all my basic spells of Elemental Shamans. I use the second line for all my special cooldowns, and I also use another line for buffs or debuffs that I want to see on my target or myself. Right here I've got Clear Casting buff, which I want to make sure is always present on me, so I'd like to see that when I have it. Now essentially how you go about setting this up. You want to first of all, there are two major differences in how you want to set up your basic spells. Most of them you want to have them as However, some of them you want to have them as a debuff or buff tracker. Now, with basic cooldowns, you essentially select the name, enable icon type cooldown, and make sure cooldown type is selected to spell and ability. Now, you may want to choose when you want the icon to be displayed, when it's used, so it will go off when you use it, and when it's ready it will reappear again. However, for some abilities, such as Lava Burst, you will want to always display them and put a timer, so when it goes off, you can still see the icon and you can see exactly how much time is left before you can use it again. With the Flame Shock, however, you want to set one up as a debuff tracker, because you want to see how much of the damage over time is left on your target, and you also not want to know if it's safe to cast Lava Burst. So essentially what you do, you press buff debuff here in the icon type, you confirm it by pressing debuff, you select unit to watch, which is targets, and you also make sure you press this only show if cast by self, in case you're not the only elemental in the raid. And you also press show timer so you can see the dot duration. So essentially, if you do it like this, you can see exactly how much of the dot you've got left, if it's safe to use Lava Burst, and you will also be able to see when Lava Burst is coming up so you never miss it, and it never hangs in cooldown even for a second. So let me show you how this works in combat. I'm just gonna lock the add-on, so we're good to go. Place the totems, and I'll do a short DPS cycle. So you can see I've got the duration of the Flame Shock on my target. I can see it ticking, and I know it's safe to use Lava Burst. You can also see my Lava Burst when it's used. I can see exactly how much is left of the cooldown without having to look at my action panels. You can see the duration of the Flame Shock is renewed using the tier 10 bonus. You can also see when you need to refresh your Flame Shock. You can also see the clear casting procs, and if at any point the clear casting proc goes off my screen, that's a bad sign, that means I'm losing DPS, so it's very good to have it on all the time. And as you can see here, I've got it on pretty much most of the time, which is very helpful for my DPS. But you can customize your own setup and put things you want to keep an eye on, but the secret is you never miss key information. And the second part, I wanted to talk about spell combination. You've got three types of spells: Lightning Bolt, which is a cast and a travel time before it hits the target. You've then got your Chain Lightning, which is a cast and an instant hit. And then you've got your Shocks, which is no cast and instant hit. Using different types of spells together in the correct order can enable you to do more DPS. The secret here is having several spells hitting the target at the same time together. That's what gives you high DPS at a second. I use a combination of Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning and a Shock, and I use it as an opening sequence and sometimes as a closing sequence, and this gives me better DPS figures than the conventional method of opening with a Flame Shock and following this with a Lava Burst. You can see exactly how much this normal combination does. While it is grammatically correct, it doesn't give you high opening figures. You can see there just over 2000, normally the figure is around 2.5k. However, I will do a different opening sequence now, which is Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning and Flame Shock. And you can see, well, my opening DPS figures are a bit freaky there, but it's around 5000. I was a bit lucky that everything critted, so let me recreate that once again to show you the true value. You can see, easy, well over 5000. The figure then drops, but then you resume your normal rotation. Another reason I use this combination instead of the normal method is that when you open with Flame Shock, that's an instant spell that can actually create aggro from an ad if the ad is not tanked yet. Whereas if you do a Lightning Bolt first, you're giving tank more time before your first hit reaches the target, and in that time he's likely to pick the target up and start tanking it. So, as a general principle, instant spells as an opening on the fresh target is a bad idea. You want to start with a cast if you can, Otherwise, you have to stand still and do nothing to wait for the tank to start tanking. And we all know that for DPS, standing and doing nothing means a loss of DPS, so if you want to do something, you might as well do a lightning bolt first. Now I also wanted to talk about the closing sequence. It is the same as the opening sequence and includes lightning bolt, chain lightning and the shock. You only use closing sequence if your DPS has to stop for any time, be it short or long. However, if your next target is in range, you do not need to use a closing sequence. For example, as you can see here, my next target is Skull and it is well in range, and I can simply click on it and continue my DPS as normal. I do not need to use a closing sequence. However, sometimes there are instances where you will have to stop DPSing. This can happen for the following reasons. For example, your target is dying or is dead, or the reasons are tactical. You have to move, or there is incoming silence, or control, or danger of any kind. Now, for this purpose, I want to demonstrate this. I have set up these two totems as my running spots, and I will be moving from one spot to the other, and I will have to stop DPS to copy a simple boss mechanic where there is danger or movement involved, which includes stopping DPS for a short period of time. Now, this is your result using conventional lightning bolts and chain lightnings, and then having to move from one spot to the other. Every time you spend time not DPSing, you're losing vital figures on your DPS. So any movement and stopping casting is very detrimental to your DPS. For this reason, the use of the closing sequence is perfect here because it mitigates some of the loss of DPS that is incurred by movement. You can see on my recount I'm doing stable 4000 DPS figure because of the movement I have to do from one totem to another. However, if I change my technique now and I use a closing sequence every time I have to move, you will notice a significant difference. Here we go. I'm going to do a series of lightning bolts, finished off by chain lightning and the shock, which is the closing sequence. So lightning bolt, chain lightning and the shock. And I'll use it every time I have to do a movement. You can see the figures are slowly starting to rise and they're slowly climbing up. I'm now reaching 5000 using this method. Essentially, the chain lightning and the shock complement nicely the fact that you have to stop DPSing, and you're landing 3 spells together at the same time just before your movement, which compensates for the loss of time. Having set up your interface using the DPS rotation add-on to track your cooldowns and special abilities, coupled with understanding your different types of spells to use them together as combinations for effective DPS, you're now ready for combat. Of course, you'll need to keep in mind every encounter has different tactics, and you'll need to think of how you're going to build your DPS into that encounter. I will now include a full-on DPS demonstration using my Tell Me When add-on, and I will initially start DPSing one target, and then I'll switch on different targets all around me, using movement and using my closing and opening sequences. you found something useful in this guide, and I wish you all the best on your raids, and I hope you can push DPS to further limits and enjoy the class of elemental shamans.